What I'm going to talk to you about today is frost risk and how we have to try and manage frost risk in our environment here in the Northern Grains region in combination with all the other abiotic stress factors that we also have to deal with, and it all ends up being very complicated, as I'm sure anybody who's a grower here will know. Now, for optimum yield anywhere in the winter cereals grain belt of Australia, and the northern region included, wheat plants or cereal plants should flower in mid-July or August. But unfortunately, I think everybody's aware of what would really happen to us if we actually aimed for that flowering period. We almost certainly lose the crop. This is well illustrated if you look at this photograph here. You'll see the crop in the foreground there is a crop that we planted deliberately for our frost trials in April of the year 2008 there at Kingsthorpe, and you can see that photo's taken in early August. That crop's been very badly frosted as we intended. You can see it's all brown, leaves are all desiccated. So here's the farmer's crop. He's actually trying to get some grain and make a living out of this rather than kill his plants. You can see that he's only planted about 4 or 5 weeks before I've taken that photo. His plants are about that big. So this crop here was putting on beautiful biomass, setting up for a very big yield. This crop here will never actually have the chance to make up that biomass again. So it's lost a huge amount of yield potential, but it's essential to do that to avoid frost damage. Now, if we look at this cartoon here that was drawn by David Woodruff many years ago using some data from Emerald, you can see here again that if we have a flowering date in mid-July, this is where we expect our maximum yield potential. And you can see that the yield potential on either side of that drops off very rapidly. It drops off at the rate of about 2%, 1 to 2% per day. Now, we're recommending people flower crops in early to mid-September versus July-August optimum period. You work that out at 1% per day yourself. It's a huge amount of crop potential we've lost. We can't do experiments to try and work that out because of what I showed you in that last slide. Simply won't get any yield if we try and plant for that. But we can use computer simulation modelling to try and predict, for example, what the yield might have been if we could plant at really early dates. Now, here's some data that was provided to me from Whopper Cropper, and you can see that the yield here in tonnes per hectare is plotted against the flowering date down here, and I've put the sowing times here. So this is the estimated flowering date in Whopper Cropper. They don't run Whopper Cropper for absolutely ridiculous scenarios that they know are going to be killed for frost. This is the earliest they go, is the 30th of April, which leads to flowering late August, puts us about there on that curve. So we're not starting up there. I just want to make that point. But this is the best sort of data I can get to try and demonstrate the point to you. If you plant in late April, flower in late August, you get close to 4 tonnes per hectare predicted on average, 100-year average rainfall, etc. If you plant at a more realistic time around the 30th of May or even the 15th of June, is quite reasonable. You're talking about a 26% loss from there, and as I say, that's not the peak. So 26% doesn't indicate the full extent of the yield potential that we lose every year. Now look, you plant and you flower at that particular time in early to mid-September, we still lose about 10% of the crop. We haven't completely eliminated the frost risk. So we're losing 10% of the crop on top of the well over 30% of yield potential. That's the real problem of frost resistance in our environment. And it's a very delicate balancing act with conflicting abiotic stresses that really lead to that. It's because the flowering is being put back to hotter months where the water is running out, stored soil moisture is running out. The further back you put the flowering date, the lower the yield becomes. So it's a very delicate balancing act trying to optimise it. And this graph shows you what we're trying to achieve when we're trying to optimise it. We've got the average long-term mean average monthly rainfall there in millimetres in the blue line there, dark blue line. We've got the number of days on that side, average per month over the long-term average. From this just comes from the Bureau of Meteorology site, anybody can get this data. And there's a number of frost days, days below zero in a particular month. This is the number of days above 35 degrees in a particular month. You can see that the rainfall is dropping and we have a dry winter mid-season. This is one of the reasons we have such a severe frost risk. To get frost, you need clear skies, you don't want cloud, you need no wind. You don't want wind. If it's clear and it's very still, then you get a frost. Now, in our environment, we get a lot of clear days. So all it takes is for the wind to drop and you've got a frost. Whereas in the south, where this is for Loxton, you can see the rainfall's going almost opposite to ours, getting rainfall actually during the season. So you've got clouds and wind and rain coming during the season, stirring things up and reducing the frost risk. So this is why in our subtropical environment, the frost risk is actually worse than it is in temperate regions and Mediterranean regions. They get a similar level of frost risk to us when they get a drought year. But of course, when they get a drought year and they've got no stored soil moisture, often frost is a bit of just the coup de grace, as it were. Now, so we are then trying to organise so our plants flower after the frost risk, but before this heat risk starts to build up and before the risk of summer storms starts to build up. So it's a very narrow target that we're going for. Now, what we would really like is to have some resistant germplasm that we could get, plant and let it stand up there in the middle of a frost event and still flower and get seed. But we don't have that at the moment. We keep looking for it. We haven't stopped, but it's something we don't have at the moment. Now, what we do is try and provide growers with the best phenology information we can for current varieties so that we can give them the information they need to try and target that flowering period for their particular region. The way we go about getting this information is by planting small phenology trials. This is one that's planted at the Leslie Research Centre, can't remember which year, quite recently. It's about July. The ones planted in April here are just starting to flower. Ones planted in early July, mid-July are starting, it's probably taken in about August, I'd say. So these ones here are just starting to come out of the ground. So we get the flowering time at 4 different planting dates for all of the near to release wheat varieties with the white tags and red barley varieties there. So we're just testing the near to release varieties to get information to put in the wheat varieties guide there for growers in the Queensland and northern New South Wales region. We can also use that information in the crop software, decision support software called Wheatman, which is a very good tool as well. Now, the flowering dates that we get are used to predict the flowering dates for particular environments on average, climatic average data. Now, of course, everybody knows that there's no such thing as an average season, and the temperature and other conditions vary from year to year. So, of course, the actual flowering times do vary in any one year from what we're predicting. For this reason, and for a number of other reasons, the recommendations that we give to growers tend to be quite conservative we're trying to save them from frost risk. But as you can see from what I said earlier, that the more you delay to save from frost risk, the more you lose in yield potential. So it's quite likely that we are recommending people plant later than was really optimum for them getting optimum yield, with a view to trying to save them from complete crop loss due to frost risk. And one of the reasons for that is that we give the recommendations over broad areas, so it's the eastern downs, western downs, Burnett, northern downs, that sort of thing. So it's not for the nearest met station to the farmer or even the farmer's paddock. And as we know, even very small topography differences make a lot of difference. I actually think that using modern technologies, there would be a lot of potential for us to improve the spatial resolution of our forecasting methods using remote sensing, using infrared information from satellites, for example. We could calibrate that data from the previous trials. It's really important to note that where you measure the temperature is very important. So actual Stevenson screens don't give you a good estimate. If you've got a thermometer in a Stevenson screen that's registering -1 on a frost night, you might find that the canopy temperature is actually -5. The soil or grass temperature might be around -5 as well. So you really need to measure the temperature at crop height to really know whether you've got a frost, and Troy will talk a bit more about that. Now, the interaction with soil moisture is quite complex. I've talked about the fact that we're trying to flower as early as possible to get around the terminal drought stress that we get. But the other interesting point about moisture and season in general is that when you've got a dry season and you've got little in-season rain, you've got more clear nights, so you will expect to get more frosts, and maybe more severe frosts in a dry season, the same as what happens in the south during a drought. And climate analysis, I won't go through this data in detail, but this is some climate classification work that's been done at CSIRO by Fernanda Drecker and Scott Chapman. But the basic take-home point is that we experience terminal drought in between 60 and 70% of seasons in most of the major cropping regions in the north. So terminal drought is a big problem, and so we're really trying to minimise the frost risk and then minimise the effect of terminal drought that's compounded by planting late. We can measure the soil moisture, at least know the soil moisture holding capacity of your soil, and you can estimate how much will be in there from the rainfall, for example, and that gives you a lot of advance information. If you've got a full soil profile and the long-term forecasts are predicting that you could expect reasonable in-season rainfall, it's good to probably aim for a long season crop, maybe something like Gregory in May if that suits your area. That'll give you a longer season of crop. Your crop will be there for more rainfall events, you'll get more biomass build up, and you'll get a higher yield. But if you haven't got a completely full profile, if it's not looking good for in-season rain, you're better off to go for a short season crop, because you won't run such a high risk of running out of moisture late in the season. Trade-off with that is that as you delay planting, the rainfall's dropping off and your planting opportunities are receding rapidly. So what we're doing is working a bit on a number of other aspects. I won't go into that now, I'll leave that for this slide. So what our current recommendations are then is that farmers make well sure that they know what cultivar they're planting, so that they'll know what the phenology of that cultivar is, and try as hard as possible to plant the cultivar as close as possible to the planting window, and that's not always easy. You can consider using a longer season genotype whenever the seasons are looking reasonably favourable. and particularly if you're in an area that stores a high level of soil moisture, because the extra biomass will give you extra yield. One thing I haven't mentioned is that it's always good to try and plant different varieties of different phenology, different flowering date, or else plant the same variety but planted at different sowing dates to cause it to have different flowering dates. And that way you spread your risk. Now there's a lot of potential in this research area to improve crop yields in Queensland. If we actually had frost-resistant germplasm which could survive a frost, actually flower in the middle of the frost season, it would completely change the entire dynamics of growing winter cereals in the northern region. And we would probably make up for all the money that we've spent on research in one season. But I mean, it's a long way before that can happen. But we're still searching. We've got a bit more room to move in the terminal drought stress and the terminal heat stress, and in one of my other projects we're making really quite good project with plants with modified root system that allow extraction of more soil moisture late in the season when the marginal water use efficiency is very high. As I said, I think there's room to probably improve the spatial resolution of our recommendations using new technologies. One thing that I haven't mentioned before is that I think there is some possibility for improving yield by expanding the cropping area to less frost-prone areas in the actual full tropics and along the coast. And we have had research projects indeed looking into that. So,
Wheatman, is it upgraded now?
Wheatman has the last upgrade was 2005 or something like that. It runs on XP, I think is the latest system that it will run on. So there's not been any support and so on for upgrading of Wheatman. Vic French over here at Miles is the best person for talking to about Wheatman. He tries to keep it updated as best as possible with the phenology information we send him about the new varieties. But it is a bit of a sad thing. There's a lot of potential for this sort of work to be done within some of the much more modern modelling facilities that we have, but we haven't had the resources to get that sort of thing done, say through Whopper Cropper or some other modelling system as well. But that is something that would be really worthwhile, I think, because Wheatman's really quite old and primitive, but best thing for farmers to use still.
Yeah, just with the your slide up there showing the big difference in planting date and yield potential, and frost being a big reason for that planting window, the SOI in relation to frost risk, at one stage, like in 1998, there was virtually no frost around, and that if you were game enough to plant early, you got a very good yield. Is there any